the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such idiots in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such idiots in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
It feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
implicit sexism when we have no
All right, screw that video. We're not watching that today. Hello and welcome to Technical Difficulties with the Badgers, where OBS and SciTube conspire to tell me, screw your settings, we're doing a different show than you want. Seriously though, welcome to HBR Talk 247, Feminists to U.S. Congress, do this now. And yes, that is a pun. I'm Hannah Wallen here with Nonsense Annihilator LRB, Badger-in-Chief Allison Tiemann, and I believe we still have a doc in here. Let me
I'm
check.
invisible.
You're invisible at the moment, but I'm going to put you in the picture as soon as... Alright. There we go. And there we go. So we have a full house tonight. This should be an interesting show. And we're going to continue our look into feminist claim that despite everything, men are somehow still not doing enough for the women's. But before we find out... Huh?
I said it's a shock.
It's a shock,
Shocking.
yes.
Men are never doing enough for the women.
Seriously, men could cure cancer and solve all of the secrets of the universe, find a way to shield the Earth from any possible hits from anything weird from outer space, make first contact and peace, and world peace, and universal peace, and feminists would still find something to say that they're not doing for women.
But if men become women, then they've done enough.
Yeah, there we go.
Then they can lean back for the rest of their lives and go, I've done everything I can.
Nope, because you know what feminists do when men become women? They complain that men are taking over women's spaces. So, and the really funny thing is that when women's spaces are based on using the display of I can't do anything because my fingernails are too long, my dress is too fancy, my hair is too weird, and some hairstyles are pretty fucking weird. All that. Men do it better. Men do it to women better. Male hairdressers are the best hairdressers. Actually, the only hairdresser that ever listened to me, like, I'm allergic to that, don't put that on my skin, was a man. And yeah, like, you look at drag queens, that professional drag queens on television that are, know what they're doing and everything, and like the old school drag queens, they do the display of femininity more flamboyant, more put together, more professional looking than women do. So there you go.
And men make up most of the best chefs.
Yeah.
They would just never dream of telling women to get out of their kitchen. On the contrary, they'd be like, no, get into my kitchen and help me. You fucking donkey. What are you? You're an idiot sandwich. Now fucking cook those peas.
He has told women to get out of the kitchen. But yeah. In any case, before we get into finding out what feminists think that men need to do for women, we've got to do what we've got to do. So, as always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, and as Twitter has demonstrated, that hasn't changed there with Musk. Not dramatically. They're more fair, but they still have the same rules. So other people that disagree with us can get banned for the same things, but you can still get banned for the rudeness of statements on Twitter. So
I got restricted because I think I said it's a mental illness. Basically said misandry is a mental illness, and I was like restricted because of that.
But at least it's only for 24 hours at a time now. I mean, there's not quite so many permabans like there were back in the day.
But the problem is that these rules make it easy for certain parties to brigade, which is a pain in the butt. But do go on, Hannah.
But yeah, so social media platforms, you may lose us on every social media platform, but you won't lose us on honeybadgerbrigade.com. So you gotta further provoke the thought police by checking us out on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find our way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Allison with an update on how Brian's doing.
All right. So as some of you may know, Brian went into the hospital last week. It was just last week's fun. Essentially, what happened is Lindsay, his wife, attempted to help him to the bathroom, and he fell and wasn't able to get up again. So she called the hospital. He was in the hospital for about a week. He's dealing with some very serious illness. The tests still haven't really resolved what precisely it is. They're hoping it's a combination of dehydration, opportunistic infections, because he's got some serious immune compromise situation going on. If you don't know about the history, Brian got testicular cancer in 2017. He had a great deal of tumors in his body, and he had to have a very intense surgery in order to resolve that, as well as chemotherapy. So some of eventually that can catch up on a person and lead to some issues. He apparently got a opportunistic infection. He, as a result, was very sick, ended up getting dehydrated. Although this is sort of an ongoing issue, the symptoms are he's having trouble with his short-term memory. He's having trouble with his balance, being able to walk. He's having trouble with his motor control, so he's having difficulty using a mouse. So this is some pretty significant issues. Doctors don't know precisely what's going on yet. They're getting the opportunistic infections under control. There's some evidence pointing to maybe some underlying chronic issue. They've said that they've given sort of a preliminary date of about 2 months for his recovery. And what I would like to do is I've opened up the monthly fundraiser that we do every month early, and anything over the base amount will go towards Brian's future income. Now, the base amount includes Brian's income for this month, so anything over that will go to Brian's future income for the second month that he needs to convalesce. Is convalesce the right word? That's the correct word, right?
Yeah, convalescence is when you're basically resting up for dealing with care and stuff.
So essentially, I want to give him as much peace of mind, so that stress is off of his shoulders, so he knows that he's getting his income coming in. And he may, during this process, it's likely he's not going to be able to do as much work as he was prior to this, and it's a high likelihood that this may be an issue going forward as well. So please help out if you're able. Once again, if we get our base amount, anything over that is going to go to his income going forward during the months that he needs to convalesce, and even beyond that, potentially, if this is an ongoing issue. And that you can do that at feedthebadger.com/support. It's really appreciated. I mean, this is both a weight on Lindsay and Brian, and it's also a weight on my mind, because I have to make sure this stuff gets done. I'll probably have to cover some stuff. Hannah's offering to cover some stuff as well. But the work does need to get done. But he's not able to do it. But I want to make sure that he continues to have his income for as long as I can manage that and we can manage that. So please do go to feedthebadger.com/support. And I apologize that, the last couple of weeks we've been really slight on the streams. It's a bit of daunting. I'm looking at taking over a lot of the tasks that he did. And he did do a lot of the technical stuff in the background. And it is actually pretty daunting, but I will endeavor to take it over and figure everything out and start to do the technical parts of the streams myself. And hopefully we can go forward and not too many of the streams get knocked out. So anyway, feedthebadger.com/support. Very much appreciated, guys. And I'll hand it back to you, Hannah. Hannah, unless there's any questions or...
I want to point out, because we've had some mention of some different possibilities of disorders and stuff in it. We don't know. The answer is that we don't know. This is something that sometimes takes a while now. Like, and the example I gave Allison when we were talking about it is, I just got this, like, at 50 years old, I get diagnosed with autism because, me. But so I find out my insurance company is pressuring my doctor to make me get a genetic test for it. It used to be that you get diagnosed with this based on your symptoms, your overt behavioral symptoms and the mental health symptoms that you describe, like not being able to look at somebody and tell whether they're bored with what you're telling them or not. But apparently that's not good enough for insurance companies anymore. So medical professionals have now started relying on things like that, some of these newer diagnostics, and ignoring existing reliable diagnostics tools because insurance companies have started pressuring them in that direction. And with my medical history, I can tell you when insurance companies start saying, we're not going to cover treatment unless you use this diagnostic tool to diagnose this illness, even though we've been able to reliably diagnose it this way for 100 years, then the medical profession starts ignoring the old diagnostic tools and using the new one. And they do that with treatment. They do that with everything. It's why actually we have an opiate problem in the United States, because insurance companies, when opiates were cheap and the federal government wasn't going after doctors for prescribing them, insurance companies basically said, well, we won't cover the physical therapy that chronic pain patients with chronic pain disorders need, but they can have all of the Percocet and other pills that you'll prescribe them. And that became the primary treatment for pain control in the United States for like 30 years, until they didn't want to pay for those anymore, and then all of a sudden the DEA started going after doctors. So the short of that is, we may not know for a while, because the medical profession may be using different diagnostic tools than they used to. They may have to take alternative pathways to find out what's going on. And also, with the complexity of the situation, if they find one cause, they may stick with that cause until it's ruled out. Like the immune issue may be the main issue, the infection may be the main issue, and until they deal with the infection, they don't know if there's other issues causing the symptoms. If that explains the situation. So it's a step-by-step process, and they can't say, this is definitely happening and that's definitely happening. It may be a while. But that's basically the situation. We have a super chat that I'm going to go ahead and read, and then we will get into the show. Albert Nada Retro gave us $5 and said, "See, Lauren, Hannah's put herself between you and the doc. It's very suspicious to me and reeks of shenanigans." I should put Doc by the computer.
She's the MC. She's in charge. She gets to go in the middle.
There we go. I am the real MC tonight.
We are Hannah's playthings, okay?
Oh no, that makes us sound really, really talk about shenanigans.
Guilty. Guilty. I need a gravel. Guilty.
We are just full of shenanigans tonight. There you go.
Guilty.
There you
Absolutely guilty.
So, to get into the article. So last week we just finished up reading the whiny intro to this suspiciously familiar sounding letter. Like I skimmed through again, and it almost looks like they went to the Women's March organization and was like, can we copy your homework if we just switch it up a little and add some things in so people don't know that we copied, because this almost runs along the same list. Like if you remember, in I want to say 2016 or 2017, we did HBR Talk went through a list of Women's March demands for the public. This list is very similar, but of course they had to put women's reproductive issues and sexuality issues and bodily autonomy first. So they say here, with ongoing and relentless attacks against access to health care, Congress must act to protect the right to access. They always like to use the word access as if somebody else doesn't pay for it, they don't have access, right? Access to essential healthcare services, including the most important one according to feminists, because they always put this first: abortion, contraception, and gender affirming care. This is a new one for them.
Yeah, as usual, they talk about gender affirming healthcare, but as usual, we have to refer all the way back to Confucius and remind ourselves that wisdom begins by calling things what they are. When people talk of gender affirming, what do they really mean? What aspect of reality are they talking about? And what they mean is sex disaffirming. If we're going to talk about healthcare, if we're talking medical shit, we should probably use medical biological terms like sex and not bullshit psychological terms like gender, which was invented by mad bastards like John Money. And it seems it was invented for this very purpose, disaffirming a very real, concrete thing like sex and replacing it with the affirmation of a subjectively malleable concept like gender. So, in the interests of quote-unquote following the science, it would be helpfully instructive if we could call this what it is, using the closest approximation of scientific terms. It's sex disaffirmation.
Yeah.
Healthcare. And that's if you can even call it healthcare. It's cosmetic surgery, which can be called healthcare in some circumstances. I guess if you're cosmetically reconstructing someone who had their face chewed off by a chimp, then yeah, that's definitely more conducive to their health than just leaving their spilled barbecue of a face to dangle precariously off their skull. But this kind of surgery, if anything, is the opposite. You're taking someone's perfectly functional genitals and replacing them with a man-made monstrosity that looks like it was chewed off by a chimp and smells like the chimp shat in it for good measure. Sorry, I've jumped the gun. Carry on.
Well, it is an interesting, this is so political, what they've done here, and it's really an attack on not just objective reality, but the ability to make medical progress. And the reason I say that is because if you look over the last 100 years of medical treatment for mental health conditions, brain disorders, and disabilities, and mental disabilities, and so on, it's gone through an evolution of treatments and calling things treatments that were maybe well-intended at the time, maybe the best they could do at the time. Some of them were out and out malicious, and then settled into a pattern in the modern era of just now starting to recognize that mental health conditions are not cookie-cutter conditions that you can treat with cookie-cutter solutions and say everybody with this condition is going to take this pill or use this therapy or do this pattern of things, and it's going to work for all of them. And they're doing that with gender dysphoria, and the idea being that if they can politicize it, and they can use it as a means of attacking objective reality, then they're going to sacrifice all of the people that are involved, all of the people with dysphoria, or even if they don't have dysphoria, but they have other mental health conditions, depression and anxiety and such, and it is related to gender issues of any kind, that they're going to take away your original identity, replace it with a new one, sacrifice you essentially for the greater political good in their own mind, and now they have an increased amount of power to tell people, well, you can't rely on objective reality. Just because you observe something doesn't mean that it's real, and therefore you have to understand things through our eyes. We can tell you what to think, and you have to believe it regardless of what you see, hear, experience, and so on. So the kind of the point of this is as much to destroy the concept of lived experience that feminists used to use to, well, maybe the allegation is false, but it was my lived experience. So I think maybe if we're going to be faced with this idea of replacing people's identity with a new one whenever they have a slight, any slight anxiety regarding issues surrounding their own gender or their relationship to people of the opposite sex or the same sex or whatever, if we're going to accept that, then, oh, sorry, feminists, but your lived experience doesn't matter anymore. You can't use lived experience as a tool to support your anti-due process advocacy, because your living experience isn't real. Your lived experience is subjective. There is no objective reality. So if you make an allegation and everybody else observes that it didn't happen, it doesn't matter what you experienced. It's false.
I just wanted to say, what's wrong with femboys?
As far as that's concerned, if somebody wants to be who they are, they can be who they are. I have just as much problem with telling people they can't as telling people they have to.
Yeah, I mean, sort of, the battle line seems to be getting really hardened, so that and the condemnation that I'm seeing towards trans women, because they are men in the eyes of some people, like I can sort of see why they're pursuing a surgical option.
Yeah.
It's like, why do we need to harden the battle lines? Is it not possible that we can accept the way people are, while holding them to account for their behavior, and not pressuring them into surgeries because they happen to be a femboy or a tom girl or tomboy?
Yeah.
Why is this? Can we not just relax? Maybe this is a silly thing to ask.
Well, this actually kind of echoes back to a discussion we had way back in the day when we were still on Blog Talk. And I remember we ended up postulating a bit on why it was, because back then it was true, why it was that the overwhelming majority of transgender people were trans women, rather than there being sort of an even distribution among them between trans women and trans men. And one of the things that we talked about was it's been acceptable for women to cross gender boundaries for decades, where I've been kind of a tomboy. I spent half my childhood up in a treetop. It was one of the only places that I could read without getting interrupted by other people. So I was a nerd and a tomboy, right? When I wasn't flipping around on the monkey bars and scaring the absolute shit out of the other kids' moms, I was up in a tree, or I was playing baseball with boys, played football with the boys, played guns with the boys. If I'd have been a 17-year-old or 14-year-old autistic kid in high school today, I would have been targeted by the gender mafia for sure. I
can add to that, but go ahead.
Well, that's what they're doing right now. But I never had anybody back in the 80s or the 90s, that not in the 70s, and nobody suggested that I was not a girl. And nobody suggested that I wasn't living up to my gender role as a girl. All right? But I had to defend my first little boyfriend from 4 other girls who were picking on him, and he couldn't defend himself because they were girls. But 4 other girls from some other neighborhood were visiting in our neighborhood, and they saw him wearing a polo shirt at the park. And I mean, he liked the shirt. It was just a shirt that he had that he enjoyed wearing. Had a little symbol on the lapel, and he wore it a lot, and nobody ever picked on him until these 4 girls came along. They were like, the side of town I lived on was a little bit rough and a little bit lower income, and these girls were dressed nice for being at the park. Like, we went to the park in our play clothes that we could get grass stains on and nobody would care. They showed up in clothes that if you got grass stains on them, mom was going to be real put out. And they were circling around him and poking at him and, sing-song, making fun of him and everything. And I ended up threatening to beat them all up if they didn't leave him alone. But they were making fun of him for wearing a girl shirt. And I was just like, what makes it a girl shirt? It's a polo shirt. Both sexes wear polo shirts. What makes it a girl shirt? I don't understand. I have shirts like that, but so does my brother. So does my dad. My dad has a pink shirt like that. What's wrong with you guys? And that they ended up telling on me, and I ended up getting in trouble. But they didn't pick on him anymore. But I could wear anything I wanted. I could wear blue, I could wear purple, I could wear a football jersey if I wanted to, and nobody would say, "Oh, that's a boy shirt, you can't wear it."
Yeah, once upon a time, specifically, ancient times in ancient Greece and Rome or whatever, men wore garments that by modern standards would be called miniskirts. You may have noticed that in these modern times of ours, all a man has to do to be considered female presenting or living as a woman is to, quote unquote, dress like a woman. He can have massive hands and a voice like Barry White, but as long as he's wearing a dress, you have to accept that he's a woman. And really, the idea of dressing like a woman is entirely cultural. Like we are built for the Stone Age, a time when there was really not a great deal of difference between what women wore and what men wore. The very idea of clothing is not something that's evolutionarily built into us. It's not part of our hardwiring at all. It's all soft wiring. So what if it was societally possible for a man to wear whatever he likes and still call himself a man? Evidently it's not, because again, this is all aesthetic. It's all cosmetic in nature. Given that a woman can wear whatever she likes and still call herself a woman, why can't a man wear whatever he likes and still call himself a man?
Exactly.
Because we've become so shallow and aesthetic as a culture.
And we're going backwards.
We live in a society.
Yeah, we're going backwards. We had, between the early part of the 20th century and the latter part of the 20th century, we had broadened, pun intended, the definition of what is a woman to allow women, biological women, a wide spectrum of different presentations of femininity. And we had unfortunately narrowed the definition of what is a man to the degree that men had no room to breathe at all. And we were just starting with the whole metrosexual thing that people were looking down on, and queer eye for the straight guy and all that. Just started to widen the spectrum of how can a man present and still be considered masculine. And it was good that we were broadening that. It was good that we were opening up our understanding of, yes, guys can be masculine in ways that if a woman did it would be feminine presenting, and they can be feminine in a masculine way, and it was actually pretty cool to see like the different ways, and that's something that I noticed at one of our conventions. Our men's rights conferences. We were in Australia, and I just happened to watch a couple of guys walk up, do the respectful nod, greeting, and walk, by each other and go to different spots and stand to watch somebody speaking. One of them was a university professor. And like he had a style of dress and everything that was like brought to mind Henry Higgins from My Fair Lady. Honestly, it was really very dignified, very not just dignified, but in it's sort of a classy, very very eloquent kind of way that you almost expected him to have a monocle. He didn't have a monocle, but you would almost expect him to have a monocle. It was very, very well put together. And the other guy was very rough cut, but he was also very dignified and very rugged. And it was kind of neat to watch. Both of them had very different manners of displaying their dignity, their respect for each other, their respect for the environment, their interest in what was going on. And they both were dealing with a little restlessness in the moment of being in a crowd. You could sort of tell. And so they were in a very dignified and unobtrusive way working out their restlessness. And they noticed each other doing the same thing, nodded, and sort of passed by and found spots to roost. And I mentioned it to one of the guys that I was sitting with, how neat it is, the different ways that men can do that. Because a lot of times you don't notice it as a woman. You kind of like it flies under your radar or over your head. Maybe I see it because I'm as tall as more men than most women are. But when women do it, a lot of times it's not as open and obvious. Like you just barely make eye contact, and then there isn't anything else. I don't know that we have an equivalent of the respectful nod. But it's pretty neat. And all of a sudden, in the last 5 years, that's been taken away. And if men are different from each other, one of them has to not be a man. If men are, one man is more rugged than another, he's got toxic masculinity, he's doing it wrong. But if one man is less rugged than another, he's effeminate and he has to actually become a woman because he's not a real man. So anymore, men are not allowed to exist.
Yeah. I just wanted to point at something out because I found your anecdote interesting. I think one of the reasons why maybe we get pushback is because one of the most dangerous things to the status quo is the fact that, or is getting men, or creating an environment where men can understand and respect different kind of expressions of manhood, and also continue to cooperate and not create these hierarchies with one man on top, the one good man, or the one man, or the one whatever man.
No.
But the other thing I wanted to point out is I've been hearing condemnation of men who engage in cross-dressing as I guess an expression of their sexuality. And I just wanted to point out that to Mike's point about the miniskirts 2,000 years ago, you don't actually have to go back that far. You can go back like
medieval times.
Not even 50 years ago. If you look at some of the outfits that men wore in the 70s, the booty shorts.
Oh, yeah. I remember the 70s booty shorts.
That would get a man declared as gay, or possibly even a trans woman. Now, to wear booty shorts now, a man would have to either be deep in the gay community or come out as a woman. And yet men could do that 50 years ago. So what I've seen progressively is this desexualization of men as men. So they can't really display their bodies. That seems to be less and less allowed. Or they are considered gay, or they're considered a trans woman. So we are desexing men, and then complaining when some men want to feel sexual, and the only way they can do that is dressing up like a woman. Well, let's maybe go back to when we allowed men to be sexy as men and feel sexually desirable as men, and maybe you'd have less men seeking to feel sexually desirable by doing the things that only women are allowed to do to feel sexually or alternatively, we allow men to be, to make these displays that we can associate with sexual desirability without coding it as female.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like we've boxed men out of being sexy. And then we're like, oh, why are men dressing like women in order to feel sexy? Well, maybe because you boxed men out of it as men. You took away their booty shorts and their weird butterfly lapel or things and
the butterfly collar.
Butterfly, tank tops. Men can't wear tank tops. In the 80s, they wore cut-off jeans shorts. Men can't do that now. You remember? And men can't wear Speedos.
Now they call the tank tops. Like we had two different types of tank tops that were really, really common in the late 70s, early 80s that have disappeared. One of them was the narrow shoulder tank top that like was almost like the top part of a wrestling uniform, and it got this really bad rap. It got labeled the wife beater, and because of that, I think men stopped wearing them altogether. And then at the other end, we had it looked like somebody just cut the sleeves off of a t-shirt, and those are called muscle shirts because they show off the biceps, and they usually just had a t-shirt collar, but sometimes there was a v-neck, and I don't see men wearing those very much anymore unless they have a sports logo on them, which really sucks because not all guys are into sports.
Have you noticed that it's progressively become baggy everything?
Yeah, baggy everything.
Like it's completely desexualized. Like the footy shorts got baggier and longer every year. It's like we're completely desexing men, and then like throwing a hissy fit when men are mammals like women. They also want to feel sexually desirable. That's a thing. And we stop them from having any outlet for that except to dress up as a woman.
Yeah, and it really kind of sucks too because men's legs are spectacular, and when men cross-dress to be sexy, they shave their legs, and they don't look like men's legs anymore. They just look, they just look like women's legs. So I don't know. It's not necessarily that being hairy makes your legs sexy, but there's a masculinity to that, and you kind of, the combination of muscle and hair and the rough skin and everything, like men's legs are spectacular. And when they work to make them look like women's legs, it kind of, like women's legs are also spectacular, but it sucks to lose that variety. Like, imagine only being able to have, I don't know, spumante flavored ice cream for the rest of your life. Yeah, it's a fancy flavor with a few different things in it, but what if you sometimes would like a little chocolate or vanilla or Superman or whatever the other flavors are? Like, you go in and it's one flavor now. We just give it a bunch of different names. And that's what we're doing. We're taking away variety. But and then at the same time they're over categorizing it.
No, so, they're taking away one entire pole. It's not just that men can't be sexy anymore. It's like there's no validity to being a man at all. And like, we've gotten to that point.
They've come up with, like, I don't know, 72 different versions of gender. But of all of the 72 versions of gender, the one that is verboten is man. Yeah, unless you were not born a man.
And I should say, it's not even a sexual thing. It's that men can't show their skin. Men can't show their flesh. And that's not just a sexual thing. It's that showing your skin, your actual body, makes you appear more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like even to someone with no idea of what sexuality is. If the more skin you have on show, the more vulnerable you look, and that's why men aren't allowed to do it, because people get discombobulated by the idea that a man can look vulnerable.
Yeah,
and that's I think that has more to do with it than even sexuality does. People are okay with seeing women's skin because they're okay with seeing women as vulnerable, and they get weirded out by even the subconscious idea of seeing any vulnerability in men.
And that's the funny thing, is that they talk about, oh, we have a gender spectrum. No, you don't. You have a gender binary. You have the genders, basically the category of gender that's allowed to be vulnerable and the category of gender that isn't. Still a binary.
Yeah, they actually are a step worse than that. They have a gender binary that is good gender, bad gender. Anything that isn't male is good gender. Anything that was born male is bad gender. That's basically what they're doing now.
Yeah, can I just qualify that?
Yeah.
I think that is because we worship victimhood and we see every other gender as being vulnerable and being capable of being victims. And men, we don't. And I think that this is not just something that feminists have done, or the woke, or the social justice warriors. There is sort of an impulse, and it's probably a good thing to a degree, for men not to want to be seen as vulnerable. They would rather be villains than victims. And there's lots of guys who would say that and explain that, and it's a good thing, because when you look at you want to see yourself in terms of having effective actions. That's a very healthy way of looking at the world. It's a very effective way of looking at the world. But sometimes, not being able to acknowledge where your agency ends can be a way that you become controlled by others.
Yeah.
And
I think another reason is because we only recognize agency in men. And our society demonizes men for their agency as a means of controlling them and manipulating them and enslaving them. So you have to shame people into doing what you want if your demands are not legitimate, right? So if you're demanding self-sacrifice without any reward, and you're demanding a support for privilege among people who do not have their agency recognized and who are not accountable for the consequences of their choices because their agency to make those choices is unrecognized, then you absolutely have to demonize and shame the population that you are manipulating. And I think that's part of the reason why male sex gets treated as bad gender, and all of the other gender identities that exist now as part of the repertoire of social discussion are treated like they are better and more desirable and more socially acceptable. And it's done some really weird things, because if somebody is still identifying as a cis man, I am the sex that I was born, man, and they do something neutral, it can be viewed as bad because they did it. Whereas if somebody demonstrates that they identify as something other than a man born as a man, they can get away with doing things that you would not put up with from a man. And you have to put up with it or you're prejudiced against them. And I mean, I encountered that recently with a food delivery driver who showed up at my apartment complex. I'm still not sure if this person was male or female. Like, this could have been a very flat-chested woman, or it could have been a man with long hair and earrings and a alto voice, just happened to have a high-pitched voice, using the higher register to pretend that they have a higher voice than they do. Or it could have been somebody in the middle of transitioning that just hadn't grown their boobs in yet, or who had had their boobs cut off. Like, it was really hard to tell. But they parked in front of my vehicle right when I had to leave for work. And I was like, I gotta leave, I gotta go. You have to move your car. You can deliver to the neighbor by parking in a parking space and getting out of your car and going, you can't park here. And this person yelled at me, I'm delivering, and walked away. Like, I should just sit there and wait to get out of my parking space and go to work. Made me 10 minutes late for work. Refused to move. And the only thing that stopped me from calling the police is that I didn't have the non-emergency number in my phone, and this person wasn't actively threatening me, so I wasn't going to call 911. But by the time I finally found the non-emergency number for the actual police station, and not some stupid security agency that Google was promoting, they finally got into their car and were getting ready to leave. But of course I got in trouble at work for that, because you can't be late for work. And this person had no consideration whatsoever for my situation and my accountability, because they didn't have to. And it was pretty obvious that they were, the flamboyant way that they were talking to me and everything was a signal. You can't criticize me for this, you can't do anything about this. A guy would have just moved. Like a regular guy, most of the people I grew up with, most of my neighbors would have just moved. But this individual was very entitled, and didn't, and yelled at me, and then actually delivered to somebody down the street on the other side of the parking lot, where they literally had open parking spaces they could have parked in. So it was definitely a display of, look what I can do. And that kind of thing, I've noticed that when I was younger and active in LGBTQ activism, like, trans women and trans men didn't act like that. They just were normal people in terms of, do a job, pay their bills, pay their taxes, go to the movies with their friends, go to a restaurant with their friends, sit around and chit-chat. They did not act like, hey, everybody, look at me and make me the center of your world, and I can do bad things to you and you have to put up with it because I'm this different thing from what you are. And it wasn't about that. It was just about, all right, here's how I'm dealing with this mental health issue. This is what the medical community is guiding me through, and try to accept me and treat me like a human being, and don't discriminate against me as not letting me be part of society because I'm going through this. And that's pretty much how you deal with any kind of an issue like that, is you fit in as best you can, and society's job is, to recognize that you're going to fit in a little differently than everybody else and be accommodating of differences that don't involve stepping on other people's toes, right? And your job is to not step on other people's toes in that process. And people got that right pretty well for 20 or 30 years, and then all of a sudden, in the 2010s, we started seeing this behavior where the point was, well, since I'm different and you're prejudiced if you don't accept everything I do, it's my right and my responsibility to step on other people's toes in order to show you that you have to tolerate everything about me in order to not be a bigot. And that's bullshit. And there are people exploiting the hell out of that now. And it's really taken away from people who are going through a genuine struggle. And to get back to what I said in the beginning about the journey that mental health care has gone through, like, we used to shock people regularly. Like, electroshock therapy still exists. It's narrowed down quite a bit. It's not done for the broad spectrum of things that it used to be done for, because it only works under very unique circumstances, or not very unique, but very specific circumstances. And there is no such thing as very unique, since unique is one of a kind. But it does work under very specific circumstances and not everything else. And we used to have medications that you would consider them to be zombie drugs. Like, people would be drugged to the degree that you couldn't have a conversation with the individual. You'd say, "How are you doing today?" and they would answer, and that's about it. And they used to pack people in ice. They used to use sensory deprivation in ways that we now know was torture. They used to lobotomize people on a regular basis in a very barbaric way. Now there's very specific and very sophisticated brain surgery that accomplishes what the lobotomy was trying to accomplish without doing the level of damage that it did. And so there's a lot of things that have advanced. But because this has been politicized, we are now being told that it can never advance. We cannot do anything less intrusive, less biologically damaging to the person's physical health. We can't reevaluate how we consider issues of dysphoria and issues of anxiety, depression, and despair surrounding gender issues. And if something goes wrong with the existing treatment regimen, it isn't because that treatment regimen didn't work for that person. It's the fault of anybody around them who suggested that treatment regimen might not be working for that person. So imagine if we did that with anything else. Arthritis, right? And we used to have some pretty harsh things that we did for people with arthritis, and you ended up over time confined to a wheelchair, and now there are medications that can slow down the degeneration of your body with arthritis, and there's therapy that can be used to help you continue to be able to work. Imagine if somebody came along and politicized that and said, nope, this person has to end up in a wheelchair by the time they're 50. It's the way arthritis works, and if you say differently, you're prejudiced against people with arthritis. How dare you? Shame on you. Like, would that be beneficial to arthritis patients? Don, thank you very much for the $5 Canadian. If you were trying to include a comment, it did not post. But in any case, my point on this is seeing people I knew go through gender dysphoria, and seeing people I knew go through, there's a cognitive dissonance that happens to you if you are in a narrow-minded area like this. People would stereotype as the small town, right? And you are bisexual and you are male, right? Seeing a bisexual male go through that, and who was kind of a femboy, go through all that, and find his way and his balance during the 70s and 80s, and then seeing how that's treated today is kind of heartbreaking, because the struggle has been turned into something that is not about the individual having a struggle, trying to find their balance in the world and make their way and be the best person they can be, and have relationships with the people around them. It is now about how you can serve this political interest's needs. And you're disposable. And your identity is disposable. And your welfare is disposable. And this is an exploitation of that, and that has to change.
Yeah, I want to point something out.
Okay.
I have some deep dive ideas to lay on you. Okay, so I think a lot of this is because we are constantly groping to explain to ourselves why women are victims relative to men while having absolutely no factual evidence for it. And so we start to, what happens is we start to latch on to these causes of groups of people with genuine grievances in society. And then we, through the process of refining their victimhood into something that women can use, we infantilize them, remove their agency, stop seeing them as actual people, and empower a certain subset of that group to start lording it over everyone and using their victimhood. And because we can't call them out, because if we do, it is homophobia, it's transphobia, it's racism, whatever else, right? And it's that process of refining victimhood in order to justify to ourselves something that is patently false, which is that women are victims of society, of the very society that protects and provides for them. That whole process is what is empowering these minority in these groups into becoming super victims. And the only way to stop that is to stop focusing on the latest minority that's being empowered to be a super victim and start saying, no, women are not victims of society, and they have never been victims of society. This belief system is toxic, and it is destroying our social cohesion and our sense of self. That is my deep dive.
Yeah, I think you have a pretty strong point there, and I think our society is maybe we're going through a humanity dysphoria where we can't recognize
misanthropic.
Yeah, we can't recognize humanity through any filter other than victim, perpetrator, and parent, child.
When we ascribe these very simplistic black and white roles to men and women, that becomes our filter through which we see all of society, because it's that powerful.
Yeah.
You know, whoever controls how men are defined and how women are defined sort of controls the overall social landscape. And I mean, I can lay something out for you. It's like, when you control that, when you start to say things like men and women are defined by oppression, men oppress women, you start to inject more and more misanthropy into society. Because, men hate themselves because they don't want to oppress women. They hate their identity. Women feel constantly insecure because there's an aspect of women that want to be protected by men. They don't get that. All they get is this idea that men hate them. So you're injecting more and more misanthropy, and the process of injecting more and more misanthropy, people start to give up their freedom to authority, because authority will say, well, I'll control your neighbor. I mean, I'll control you, but I'll control your neighbor. If you give up your freedom, I'll control that guy that you're now suddenly suspicious of because of your misanthropy. So it's all connected, and it all starts with how we frame men and women. Is it a loving connection? Like you can say a lot about Christians, and I'm sure people will, but the idea that there is a loving connection between men and women, it is in there. You can criticize certain aspects of it, but there is a recognition that men sacrifice for women. There's a recognition that women trust men. I hate the word submissive wife. It's more like trusting wife. So there is something good about that relationship. You take the feminist framework of men and women, and it's horrifying. It's like a horror show. Men's primary impulse towards women is to be monstrous to them. Like the least demonic aspect of that is that men just oppress women somehow. It's like a mild oppression, just like a really muggy, over hot day, that kind of oppression, all the way to the extreme forms that men deliberately rape, murder, torture, dismember, cannibalize women as a deliberate act to keep women under their thumb. So that spectrum of hatred and oppression, and you're injecting that into people's sense of themselves and sense of their place in the world and their understanding of their relationship to others. And it's sort of really disturbing.
What's really if you watch how that manifests over my lifetime I'm just half a century of experience of that. But if I look at the way my parents describe their childhood and everything, because our parents' generation, or at least my parents' generation, and Allison, you're about my age, you're a little younger than me, but our parents' generation was the Vietnam War generation, right? And while that conflict was brewing and everything, the strictness of the standards that boys faced ramped up, like during the big, I guess you could call it the big war era, because you had their parents' generation went through World Wars I and II, and their generation's ideas of masculinity were shaped by the concept of very real male disposability, men being in the hundreds of thousands drafted into the military and sent into absolute hell to die as cannon fodder. And then they raised the ones that came home and the wives of the ones that didn't come home. The ones that came home with their wives, and the wives of the ones that didn't come home with the men in their family that could help, raised a generation of boys with the idea that this is what manhood is. That your primary feature is that you are disposable for society. That at any time you may get called up by your government to go and defeat evil, which you can't see the scare quotes, but every time the government wants to dispose of a lot of men, and make a lot of money, that's their narrative. We have to defeat this evil, this foreign evil. And yeah, Hitler was evil. Hitler was the fault of the United States involvement in World War I. If the U.S. hadn't gotten involved in World War I, the balance of everything would have changed. Everything. And that's it. So, like fuck the idea of us getting involved in everything, right? But that idea that you're cannon fodder and you have to be ready by the time you're 18 to become cannon fodder, because you're a man, and that is your manhood. That is the primary feature of your manhood, was prevalent in the Greatest Generation, the Baby Boomer generation, and Generation X. We all had that. We were all raised with that. All of the boys that we grew up with, all of the social attitudes in regard to any display of softness that they might have were based on that. You have to be ready to go to war. And if you're not ready to go to war, you're not a man. Right? That's where that comes from. You have to be cannon fodder for political purposes. So I don't really see a whole lot of difference between that and this current gender-affirming care movement. It's just a different type of cannon fodder. Now you're sacrificing your whole identity, but you have to keep on living after your identity has been murdered. And it's still making you cannon fodder for somebody else's political interests. There is no difference between Woodrow Wilson signing up hundreds of thousands of American men to go die in World War I, and then creating the environment that caused hundreds of thousands of American men to go die in World War II. And the gender mafia today, taking the manhood away from boys, the future manhood that they would experience is gone forever, and trying to turn girls into boys, that knowing that they are going to be causing suicides, that they are going to be wrecking people's lives, that they are going to be taking away their future relationships, their future parenthood. Their whole future changes because of this. Like, their personal future is gone, and now they're going to have to live out somebody else's future because of this. Right? There's no ethical difference. There's no moral difference. The only difference is that they're creating a generation of walking wounded instead of a generation of coffins.
Yeah, I've had that too. Oh, sorry, Doctor. Go ahead.
On both your points, the idea of love thy neighbor has relative boundaries. It can mean love only those closest to you. It can mean love literally everyone on Earth. What people don't understand is how it can be extended to those extremes of everyone on Earth, at the extent that it's ripped asunder from those closest to you, so that you only love those far away but not those close to you. What if you find yourself loving those isolated tribes in Papua New Guinea at the expense of ever possibly loving the people who live next door to you, your literal neighbors? That's a thing.
Yeah.
A thing I call oikophobia, where you love people far away and you hate the people right next to you. If you hate the people in the house next to you, who do you hate even more than that? The biological sex right next to you. That's how misandry is the first phenomenon to unearth itself in the event of oikophobia pushing that Overton window wheresoever it may go. You know?
I think that, I mean, I don't know if it started with that self-hatred, but I think it started with a lack of a central organizing principle, and then we just sort of shoved women's vulnerability into that, because that's what we do. It is already sort of a shadow central organizing principle, and then we started to have more and more explanations for how women were victims, because it's actually patently obvious that society doesn't victimize women. Society always puts them in the safest place, the place with the most consistent access to resources, because if society didn't, society would cease to exist in an evolutionary sense. I think that what happens with I love the Papua New Guinea, like the tribes in Papua New Guinea, and I hate my neighbor, is it's easy to love the tribes in Papua New Guinea because they're a complete abstraction that you can use to justify your own nonsense. Mm-hmm. Whereas much difficult to love somebody who, makes a stupid sound every time they do, I don't know, they fix the door, or has foibles you don't like, or you have to accommodate in some way, or it's much harder. So it's much easier to love an abstraction way over there, and then use your love of an abstraction way over there to lord it over your neighbor, than it is to love your neighbor. It's like a cop-out.
Yep.
I hope I didn't step on you too much there, Doctor.
No, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's an excuse to hate the people next to you, and this is the problem of an empire falling into its eventual destruction, when they're so just used to the people near them that they can afford to just hate them, and they don't even see it as a form of hate, because most people have never heard of the term oikophobia, let alone the concept of it. Like, it's impossible to love that which is to hate that which is familiar. Surely, the only form of hate is hating that which is far away from you. But no, we're discovering more and more as this. I'm going to say it, religion, this Gnostic religion, kind of casts this shadow over our dying empire. No. It's very possible to have an irrational fear and hatred of the familiar. It's become so normalized that most people don't have a name for it. They can't even conceive of its existence because it's so normalized.
It's a form of escapism. If you love what's around you, you love the familiar. When you love people, you take responsibility for their welfare, at least to a degree. Like, obviously, you don't take away their independence, you don't take away their responsibility for their welfare. But when you love your family, I love my family, I do work, I earn an income, I support my family. That is a big part of why we do work. When you love, you are taking on genuine emotional labor. Let's put it that way. Love is probably the biggest emotional labor that you will take on, and people use the term very lightly, right? And they will love distant things more than they love the people around them, because it takes less physical and emotional labor to care deeply about something going on hundreds of miles away, where you can put $1 in the hat and you have demonstrated your love. Than it does to
advocate for them,
right? Or you can shame other people for not loving them as much as you do, right? But it takes a lot of work. It's very involved and very labor intensive to love your family, and even to love your next door neighbor. Like, when we had an ice storm, my neighbors were all out checking on each other to make sure people were okay. When the Memorial Day tornadoes hit here in Dayton, we found out quickly that one of my neighbors was trapped in her bathroom after the roof was taken off of that building, because everybody came out and started checking on everybody while the tornadoes were still on the ground, because we didn't know that there were so many. But that's loving your neighbor. Like, it's not, oh, hi neighbor, I'm gonna give you a hug. It's, hey, I heard you've been sick. I made this chili soup. I brought over a little tureen of chili soup. Do you think you could eat that? and that kind of thing. It's I noticed your car was broken down. Did you want to ride to work? I can pick you up afterwards. Doing things to help people, and being there when somebody says, "Gosh, I'm just having a bad day. My dog died," and that's loving your neighbor. Listening to the person talk about, how much they miss their dog, and reminiscing about the dog. That's loving your neighbor. That's a lot of work. And we do it because we want to. We do it because we care about our neighbors and we're friends and we want to know each other's okay and we have a connection. You don't have to have a connection to a tribe in Africa or to the environment to demonstrate your love. But that phenomenon, that behavior, that laziness and that oikophobia, that's not new, and noticing it isn't new. And if you want a good picture of it, look up the the lyrics to a song. There's a Three Dog Night did it, but it's actually from the movie Hair. Easy to be hard. And just read it. If you're old, you know what I'm talking about. The scene in the play was one of the hippies that was protesting with the other hippies, right? His wife and kids showed up and were like, come home. We need you. We're not living well without you. And he was like, but I'm doing big things. I'm doing something about the problem. When actually, he was protesting, he was caring about being anti-war and everything, but not taking care of his loved ones anymore. And that's the situation, right? You can be cruel and heartless and ignore the plight of your family members or your neighbors, your loved ones, because the person's right in front of you, because some distant cause takes all of your attention. And it's very easy if you let yourself. It's the laziest thing you can do, right? It is the absolute laziest thing you can do. Care about a big issue at the expense of a small person.
Can I just get in here and do some super chows?
Yeah, we're gonna do the super chows, and I have one super chat.
Just so you know, I don't mean to take away your thunder. I have some thank yous to give as well for the people who have supported.
Awesome.
Let me do that, and then you guys can take away on the super chows. Although one of the super chows is sort of relevant. If you want to send us a message, it's feedthebadger.com/justthetip. That's feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And that helps you avoid any YouTube censorship, and we get the full benefit of the amount minus any PayPal fees, or if you don't use PayPal, they usually take some fee from the credit card company. So anyway, that's feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And I have some thank yous to give. I would like to thank Math Freak 123. I hope HBR, I hope that's not your legal name, Math Freak. For $25. I should just say Math Freak. And I'd also like to thank Meredith G for $100. Thank you, Meredith G. And A Better Strawman, again, hopefully not your legal name, for $100. Thank you, A Better Strawman. And Mrs. Anne of Arc for $10. Thank you, Mrs. Anne of Arc. And we got a new subscriber, Pardis, who is a new $5 a month subscriber. So thank you, Pardis. And so thank you to all. And if you would like to help out, once again, it's feedthebadger.com/support for our monthly fundraiser. I'm opening it up early, so hopefully we'll get some overage to give to Brian in terms of future income, because he's struggling a bit with being able to manage his work and recuperating from his illness. So that, once again, that's feedthebadger.com/support. Speaking of taking care of the people around you, I suppose. Versus just focusing on the outside, or focusing on what's easy to care about, which doesn't require a lot of personal effort or alternatively seems much bigger and more grandiose, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and my grandparents had an interesting philosophy about this, right? It is okay to care about people in distant lands if you're going to go there and help them. Like they did, their activism was pretty much the inspiration for my parents and myself in a lot of ways, what we do. And they first engaged in activism in their community, and they made a whole medicine-wide change in the medical industry. I'm not gonna. There's an organization that I'm not gonna identify because I don't want our haters to mess with that organization. It does very good things for people who are very vulnerable, and they've made dramatic changes in the style of care that a particularly vulnerable population receives, to where they've gone from being treated like a problem to being treated like human beings with needs that can be met and whose lives can be facilitated in ways that help them to have normalcy that they never would have had if they were just ignored and pushed aside and set aside like they used to be. And they did that, and they started in their home community with actual neighbors and people who directly needed help, and saw the bigger problem and continued to help their neighbors while working on a bigger problem, and then established, and like I said, in an area of medicine, a change to an area of medicine. And then when they've gotten that established, and they were to the point where they weren't really needed, their involvement in that wasn't really needed anymore, they did missionary work as part of the church that I grew up in, where they went to communities in a couple of different foreign countries where there was no hospital, and built hospitals. And they found out there was no school, and they built schools. And then they helped the community build churches. And it was in that order. It's triage. The hospital is the most important thing. You can't study if you're dying. I mean, you can, but it's not exactly easy. And then, your spiritual needs are important, but your education is more important, right? And then the community asked for the church. And that's how my grandparents did things. And they did that in South America. They didn't go to Africa. They went to South America, and they took care of the people in those areas. And they came home and they took care of the people at home. And I'll never forget standing and watching when my grandparents, both of them, when they passed away at different times, the line for their funeral, like the line of cars coming to the gravesite, was so long it took almost half an hour for everybody to pull in. Like, it was a couple of miles. They touched so many people's lives, and that's who I look up to, because they helped people. They showed their love by helping people to have normalcy and to overcome obstacles. And so that's kind of what I try to do in my life. Is my job, my regular job is about that. When I worked in retail, I looked for ways to do that for people, even though that wasn't necessarily the focus of my job. When I've worked with people among my friends and in my neighborhood and stuff, I've done the same thing. Like, that's how you show love for your neighbor. That's just what I was taught, and it drives me nuts when I see people, I don't know, postulating and that you don't care about the issue of the day if you don't do a specific form of genuflection that doesn't provide any assistance to anybody or materially change things or advance the cause in any way. It's not just lazy. It's cruel and heartless. And I guess that's basically what I see with this situation is there's a lot of posturing and postulating. Like, we're going to suppose that you are prejudiced if you don't respect our posture and if you don't worship our ideas. Like that's where we are now. And it's really demoralizing. But I don't think we have to do that. I think if enough of us stand up against that means of activism and demonstrate, you can help people by actually going out and doing things to uplift people and free people from their shackles, their inability to do things for themselves. That will kill this, and that's my hope. In terms of sorry, Dawn, don't ever feel stupid. If you were stupid, you would get mad at us. Sorry, that just hit me. Don't let anybody make you feel stupid. And no, they weren't Mormons. The denomination I grew up in was Christian Union, but my grandparents, depending on where they were, they went to what church was convenient. So they went to Nazarene Church for a while. They went to Methodist, I think, for a while, but and Baptist. It was just wherever there's a community within the church that is actively loving and caring and open and welcoming. That's where God is. So it doesn't matter what the church calls itself. It just matters if God's in there and you can have fellowship with other people who are like living the commandment to love your neighbor and living the commandment to love God. That's all it takes to be Christian. That's what I grew up with. So yeah, it wasn't denominational. It was, and in fact, the Mennonite Church is involved in the organization now that they formed. So like there are other churches that helped along the way as well, but the Mennonite Church really stepped up and was like, we are going to make this happen because it's a good thing. So it's different. It just depends, and you can walk into, a good church when you walk in, versus a church that has gone toxic, because sometimes you walk into a church and it's all everybody in there is that lady from the Mississippi Squirrel Revival that judged everybody else and then confessed to every sin in the book, or or they're all afraid, right, or whatever. Where you walk into a good church and everybody is happy and not fake happy, not glad hander happy, but genuinely relaxed and enjoying each other's company and planning to do things as a community and involved in their community. And so it's very different. Like, none of them, they don't have to be huge, but yeah. So that's where that comes from. That's where it's not about the denomination or even the church itself. It's about the community within that church. It makes a big difference. So we don't have just Super Chows. We have, was that the only Super Chow? Is that a Super Chows, Allison? I think we may have lost Allison. I think that's the only Super Chows. That's okay. I can actually look if I can find. We have a gazillion chats in our Discord. Here somewhere is the Super Chow channel, and Okay, so the last one I saw, or last one she said was about the subscription, right? And she didn't mention the Super Chow from Meredith, right?
I think she mentioned something about Meredith.
Honey for the Badgers? Okay, so there was $5 from Meredith, Honey for the Badgers. Thanks for the great conversation. Reminder, Super Chows are better than Super Chats every day. Then we have Patrick Leg Bateman. Gave us $5 and said, Patrick, shaved legs, what do you think? Whoa, very nice. And the razor was called Venus. Let's see Paul Allen's legs. Look at those quads. The tasteful thickness of it. Oh my god. They even have calves. That's funny. So she didn't read that one. Okay. So yeah, those were new. And then I think she mentioned the subscription. And the previous ones are from me, and I forgot to write down, so I'm going to do that this time. We comment done at the end, so we know the next set. But hell, I don't even know what kind of razor I use. I don't buy razors from the regular shelf. I only buy razors when I find them on the shelf that the grocery store puts them on when they're trying to get rid of them, and they mark them 75% off. So the rest of the time I just yank the hair out by the roots with sugar wax, because you can make that at home. The Discord, I believe the Discord is linked on our blog page. I think you can get into the Discord, the free part of the Discord on our blog page, and that's honeybadgerbrigade.com. So you can find everything about us on honeybadgerbrigade.com. There is one other super chat from Albatross. Gave us $5 and said best wishes to Brian and the rest of the Honey Badger Radio team. Then we have some Rumble rants. So NobaFan21 gave us $1 and said, what frustrates me on how feminists approach gender is both gender is a social construct and be a real man, even though that's not how it's worded. But it's clearly the tone. Then gave us another $1 and said, sorry if this is off topic, but I was wondering how the psychology works in fiction where all the women are automatic besties. I've seen this in anime, I've seen this in some Western works, and that's 1 out of 2. The second comment from NobaFan gave us another $1 and said, but it feels detached from reality, which should be more like women who are besties, are the only besties in their circle, and all other social interactions are either just strangers or bitches. So there's anime actually does pretty good with frenemies, getting frenemies right, and also like the women who really hate each other, and who are just like open enemies and are constantly at war with each other. Like anime actually portrays that pretty well. But yeah, a lot of like if you watch sitcom, you won't see that as much anymore. It used to be more common to really pick up on the nuance of female relationships, and now it's like, oh yeah, all the women have to be best friends, or it's all really lighthearted. But I think modern television, a lot of the reason that you're seeing women portrayed so one-dimensionally is that everything about it is one-dimensional. It is mind-numbing, and I can't stand any of it. I don't watch TV anymore because of that.
And any male character that isn't presented 10-dimensionally is toxic masculinity.
Yep.
It's so tiresome.
Yeah, I'm so sick of modern television. I like shows that are that I watched growing up with my parents, like, and if it's going to be stereotypical and one-dimensional like that, it needs to be the kind of thing that is, well, even that wasn't, like, there was nuance to even the old sitcoms where they stereotyped the shit out of everybody. there was still nuance. Like, go back and watch old episodes of Hogan's Heroes. Like, incredibly racist against Germans because of, the portrayal of World War II and everything. But all of the different people from the Allied prisoners of war group, they were kind of stereotyped as well, and it's kind of funny, but there's still nuance to it in comparison to today's television. I don't know how to explain it. Like, you could, if you watch old westerns, old television westerns, you can actually see women portrayed as having flaws and engaging in bad behavior and being embarrassed about it later, or being accountable for it, being arrested for it and everything. And it's, you almost have to watch Lifetime television for women or whatever to see women acting like that and actually facing consequences, and then only if they victimize other women or another woman gets to be the hero. Very, very weird stereotypical movies there too. But yeah, but it's supposed to be detached from reality because it's supposed to take your mind off of reality. So, I don't know. Anyway, that's the last not super chat, but Rumble rant. And I think that's everything. I hope I haven't missed anything this time.
We have gone 2 hours on one sentence.
Yeah, we didn't even finish it.
I'm proud of us. I'm proud of all of us.
We aren't
this has got to be a record, isn't it?
We aren't going to talk about the next part of and ensure access care for survivors of sexual violence just in this episode, just because, like, holy shit. But I will say this. Nobody stands at the door of your local hospital and says, "Oh, you're a rape victim? You can't come in here." Nobody. Just a point I want to make. But with that, because I do have to work tonight, we can't have a 2-hour. Well, this is a 2-hour sausage. We can't have a 3-hour sausage. So I'm going to twist off the end of the sausage at this point, and we'll talk about access care for survivors of sexual violence and defending abortion care next week. So thank you, Allison, if you can still hear me, for coming on to talk. Thank you, Mike, for coming on to talk. Thank you, Lauren, for always being here. Sorry we out-talked you this week, I think. And thanks to everybody.
I think Lauren's asleep and Allison is muted and other things. She can't hear us or talk to us.
And we just got a super chat. Miss Jonah or Miss Anne of Arc gave us $5 and said, "Here's some chili for my virtual neighbor. Get well soon, Brian." So thank you very much for that, Miss Anne, and we will pass on the message as well. But thanks everybody for listening and for all the great comments, and thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. Good night, all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude, okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.